They told me, "Don't make this about you. Just send the gift and leave." I did one better. I froze the event card, concealed the venue contract, and pulled my name off the sponsor list. By 8 p.m., guests were standing outside, and my sister texted, "Where's the key?" I replied, "Check your entitlement." There wasn't room for me. Now there's no room for anyone. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the villain in my own family's story, but here we are. My sister was getting married. Big event, 300 guests, destination venue with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The kind of wedding that gets featured in magazines if you're lucky. She'd been planning it for 18 months, and I'd been funding it for 17 of those. Not because I'm rich. I'm comfortable, sure, but this wasn't spare change. I own a mid-sized logistics company that does well enough. My sister and her fiancé were still building their careers, and my parents were retired on a fixed income. When she came to me with her vision, tears in her eyes, I didn't hesitate. Family helps family. That's what I believed. I covered the venue deposit, the catering advance, the decorator's retainer. My name went on every contract because my credit was solid and my sister's wasn't. The venue required a primary guarantor, and I signed without thinking twice. Over the months, I transferred money in chunks, watching my savings account shrink while her Pinterest boards exploded with gold-rimmed chargers and imported flowers. She'd call me every week with updates, gushing about dress fittings and cake tastings, and I'd smile and tell her it sounded perfect. Then the invitation arrived. I opened the heavy cardstock envelope expecting to see my name listed somewhere, maybe in the program as a groomsman or at least acknowledged in some small way. Instead, I found a standard guest invitation addressed only to me. No +1, despite the fact that I'd been seeing someone for 8 months. My girlfriend wasn't flashy or connected, just a genuinely kind person who worked as a teacher. But apparently, she didn't make the cut. I called my sister that evening and asked about it. She got defensive immediately, saying the venue had capacity limits and they'd had to make difficult choices. I reminded her that 300 people didn't sound like a capacity problem, and she shifted to saying her future in-laws had a long guest list and she'd had to prioritize family connections that mattered for their future. The words hung there. Connections that mattered. I asked where I'd be sitting. She went quiet for a moment, then admitted I'd be at a table near the back with some distant cousins I'd met maybe twice in my life. Not at the family table, not near the wedding party, just tucked away where I wouldn't be visible in the photos. Something cold settled in my chest, but I kept my voice level. I asked if she understood that I'd paid for most of this wedding. She sighed like I was being difficult and said that's exactly why she was calling. Could I cover the final venue payment due next week? Another $12,000. The entertainment deposit was also coming up, and the florist needed their balance. I told her I needed to think about it. She got upset, saying everything was already booked and locked in, and if I backed out now it would ruin everything. I said I wasn't backing out, just needed a few days to look at my finances. She reluctantly agreed and hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, doing the math in my head. I'd already spent close to $60,000 on this wedding. $60,000. And I was worth a back table seat and no acknowledgement. The next day, my mother called. She'd heard I was having second thoughts about helping with the wedding and wanted to smooth things over. She told me this was my sister's special day and I shouldn't make it about me. Just send the gift, show up, smile for the photos, and be supportive. Making waves would only create family drama that would last for years. I asked her if she thought it was fair that I'd paid for everything but was being treated like an afterthought. She said life isn't always fair, and sometimes we make sacrifices for the people we love. Besides, my sister was under a lot of stress with the planning, and I should be understanding. That conversation ended badly. I told her I'd handle things my way. I spent the next 2 days going through every contract, every receipt, every email. My name was on everything. The venue contract listed me as the primary client and financial guarantor. The catering company had my credit card on file. The decorator, the DJ, the photographer, all of them had agreements signed by me. I started making calls. First, I contacted the venue. I explained there had been a change in plans and I needed to freeze any access to the event spaces until further notice. The manager was confused, saying the wedding was in 3 weeks and everything was confirmed. I calmly reminded her that I was the contract holder and the person who'd paid the deposit and all subsequent payments. I requested that all access codes, keys, and entry permissions be suspended until I provided written authorization to proceed. She hesitated, but legally, she had to comply. I was the client of record. Next, I called the caterer. I didn't cancel anything. I just put a hold on the final headcount confirmation and asked them to pause any food preparation until I gave the green light. Same with the decorator. I told them there might be some last-minute changes to the setup plan and asked them to wait for my approval before moving forward. The photographer was easier. I explained that I needed to review the shot list and requested that they not finalize the timeline until hearing from me directly. Then I contacted my bank and put a temporary freeze on the credit card linked to all the wedding vendors. Not a cancellation, just a freeze. Nothing could be charged without me manually approving it. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. 2 weeks passed. My sister called a few times asking about the final payment, and I kept saying I was working on it, that I'd have it sorted soon. She sounded anxious but not panicked yet. My mother called too, repeating her plea for me to just be supportive and not cause problems. The week of the wedding arrived. My sister texted me asking if I'd sent the venue payment yet because they were asking her about it. I told her I'd handled it. Technically true. I'd handled it by freezing everything. 3 days before the wedding, the vendors started calling my sister directly. The caterer couldn't confirm the final menu because they hadn't received approval. The decorator couldn't access the venue to start setup because the access codes weren't working. The photographer was asking about the timeline that hadn't been finalized. My sister called me in a panic, asking what was going on. I told her I wasn't sure. Maybe there were some administrative issues on the venue's end. She accepted that explanation because she was drowning in last-minute details and didn't have time to dig deeper. The day before the wedding, things started falling apart. The venue manager contacted my sister saying there was a problem with the contract and they couldn't proceed with setup until it was resolved. My sister called me screaming, demanding to know what I'd done. I asked her what she meant. She said the venue was saying I'd frozen everything and they couldn't move forward without my authorization. I stayed calm. I told her that I'd been thinking about what our mother said, about not making this about me. And she was right. I shouldn't make this about me. So I decided to remove myself from the equation entirely. Since I wasn't important enough to sit with my family or bring my girlfriend or be acknowledged in any meaningful way, I figured my involvement in the wedding didn't really matter either. She started crying, begging me not to do this. She said she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she'd fix the seating arrangements and add my girlfriend to the guest list. I told her it was too late for that. The invitations were sent, the seating chart was printed, and clearly, I wasn't a priority. So why should her wedding be my priority? She threatened to sue me. I reminded her that every contract was in my name. Every payment had come from my accounts, and legally, I had every right to withdraw my support. She hung up. My father called next. He was furious, telling me I was being petty and vindictive, that I was ruining my sister's wedding over hurt feelings. I asked him if he'd offered to help pay for any of it. Silence. I asked him if he'd stood up for me when I was being relegated to the back of the room. More silence. I told him I was done being the family ATM and punching bag, and if they wanted to salvage the wedding, they could figure it out themselves. That evening, my sister posted on social media asking if anyone knew a good lawyer because a family member was sabotaging her wedding. The comments were full of supportive friends saying how awful that was and offering to help however they could. None of them knew I'd paid for everything. My sister had never mentioned that part publicly. The wedding day arrived. I woke up to 17 missed calls and twice as many texts. My sister, my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them demanding I fix this immediately. I ignored them all. At noon, I received a text from my sister that just said the venue was locked and guests were starting to arrive. At 2, she sent another message asking where the key was. At 5, she called me sobbing, saying people were standing outside informal where with nowhere to go, that she was humiliated, that I'd destroyed the most important day of her life. At 8 p.m., she sent one final text asking me where the key was. I responded with 2 words, check your entitlement. Then I blocked her number. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My parents showed up at my apartment the next morning, pounding on the door until I answered. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, and my mother's eyes were red and swollen. They pushed past me into the living room and started yelling before I could even close the door. My father said I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that what I'd done was unforgivable. My mother just kept asking how I could be so cruel, how I could humiliate my sister like that in front of everyone she knew. I let them finish, then asked them a simple question. Did either of them know how much money I'd spent on that wedding? They looked at each other. My mother said she knew I'd helped out, but my sister had been handling most of the finances herself. I laughed, actually laughed, and told them the real number. $60,000. Their faces went pale. My father tried to recover, saying that didn't give me the right to sabotage everything. I asked him if they thought $60,000 bought me the right to at least sit with my own family at the wedding. He didn't answer. I told them that for 17 months, I'd been treated like a bank account with legs. Every conversation with my sister had been about money or what else she needed. Not once had she asked how I was doing, how my business was going, or anything about my life. And when it came time to actually celebrate, I wasn't even worth a decent seat or a +1 for my girlfriend. My mother said I should have communicated my feelings instead of doing something so destructive. I reminded her that I tried to talk to my sister, and she'd dismissed me. I tried to talk to her, and she'd told me not to make it about myself. So I'd followed her advice. I'd taken myself out of the equation completely. They left without another word. The social media situation exploded. My sister had posted a long, tearful explanation about how a vindictive family member had sabotaged her wedding, and the post had gone viral in our extended network. Friends were offering to throw her a replacement ceremony. Strangers were sending her money, and everyone was demanding to know who the monster was that had done this. 3 days later, someone leaked that it was me. Suddenly, I was getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, calling me every name imaginable. But then something interesting happened. A few of my cousins started asking questions. They wanted to know why I'd done it, what had led to such an extreme action. I didn't respond publicly, but I did send a private message to one cousin I'd always been close with. I explained everything: the money, the seating arrangement, the dismissive treatment, the lack of acknowledgement. I sent her screenshots of the payment receipts and the text conversations with my sister. She was shocked. She'd had no idea I'd funded the wedding. My sister had made it sound like she and her fiancé had saved up for years to afford their dream wedding. She asked if she could share the information with a few other family members who were asking questions. I told her she could share whatever she wanted. I was done hiding the truth to protect my sister's image. Update 2. The narrative started to shift. More family members reached out privately, asking for my side of the story. I sent them the same information: receipts, contracts, text messages. The evidence was undeniable. My sister's social media post was suddenly full of new comments, people asking why she'd accepted so much money from me and then treated me like garbage. She deleted the post within hours, but screenshots had already circulated. My sister's fiancé called me. He was angry at first, demanding to know how I could do this to them. I asked him how much he thought his wedding had cost. He threw out a number, about $30,000. I told him he was off by a factor of 2, and that I'd paid for almost all of it. He went quiet. He asked why I hadn't said anything earlier. I told him I'd tried, that I'd been shut down and dismissed, that I'd been told repeatedly not to make the wedding about me. He said he hadn't known any of this, that my sister had told him her parents were contributing significantly and that I'd just helped with a few deposits. I could hear the realization hitting him in real time. He asked if we could meet in person to talk. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop 2 days later. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since the wedding disaster. He apologized immediately, saying he'd had no idea how much I'd contributed or how I'd been treated. He said my sister had handled all the planning and he'd just gone along with her decisions, trusting that she was being fair to everyone. He admitted that in hindsight, he'd noticed I wasn't included in a lot of the wedding party activities and that my seating seemed odd, but he'd assumed there was some family dynamic he didn't understand. He'd never questioned it. I appreciated his honesty. I told him I didn't blame him. This was between me and my sister. But I also told him he should probably have a serious conversation with his new wife about honesty and priorities, because if she'd been willing to treat me this way, he should consider what that meant for their future together. He nodded slowly and said he'd been thinking the same thing. The extended family started splitting into camps. Some people thought I'd gone too far, that I should have found a better way to handle the situation. Others thought my sister had gotten exactly what she deserved. Family gatherings became awkward, tense affairs where people avoided certain topics and carefully navigated around the elephant in the room. My girlfriend, who'd been patient and supportive through all of this, finally asked me if I regretted what I'd done. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told her I regretted that it had to happen at all. I regretted that my sister had valued money over relationships. I regretted that my parents had enabled her behavior instead of standing up for what was right. But I didn't regret taking back my power and refusing to be treated as less than I was worth. She said that was a good answer. Update 3. 6 weeks after the wedding that never happened, my sister reached out through a mutual friend asking if we could talk. I agreed to meet her in a public place, a park near my apartment. She looked different. Thinner, tired, older somehow. She sat down across from me and didn't speak for a full minute, just stared at her hands. Finally, she apologized. Not the performative, social media kind of apology, a real one. She said she'd gotten so caught up in planning the perfect wedding that she'd lost sight of what actually mattered. She'd treated me like a resource instead of a brother, and she'd been too proud and stressed to see what she was doing until it was too late. She admitted that she'd felt entitled to my help because I was successful and she wasn't, and that she'd convinced herself that I should want to help without expecting anything in return. She'd told herself that love meant giving without keeping score, and she'd used that logic to justify taking everything I offered while giving nothing back. I asked her why she'd seated me in the back. She said honestly, she'd been embarrassed. Her fiancé's family was wealthy and connected, and she'd wanted to project a certain image. Having me front and center would have meant acknowledging that she'd needed help, that she couldn't afford her dream wedding on her own. So she tried to minimize my visibility while maximizing my financial contribution. It was a painful confession, but at least it was honest. I told her that I couldn't just forgive and forget, that the damage she'd done to our relationship was significant and would take time to heal, if it ever did. But I appreciated her honesty now, even if it came too late. She nodded and asked if there was any way to salvage things. I told her that depended entirely on her. If she wanted to rebuild trust, she'd need to show me through actions, not words, that she valued me as a person and not just as a source of financial support. She agreed and asked what I wanted from her. I told her I wanted 3 things. First, she needed to publicly acknowledge what had really happened, not to humiliate herself, but to set the record straight with our family. Second, she needed to work out a payment plan to reimburse me for the wedding expenses. I didn't need the money immediately, but I needed to know she understood the value of what I'd given. Third, she needed to genuinely apologize to my girlfriend for excluding her and treating her as unworthy. She agreed to all 3 without hesitation. Over the next few months, things slowly improved. My sister posted a thoughtful message on social media taking full responsibility for what had happened and acknowledging how she'd mistreated me. The post didn't go viral like her previous one, but it was seen by the people who mattered. She set up a payment plan, transferring $500 to me every month. It would take years to pay back the full amount, but the gesture mattered more than the money itself. She called my girlfriend and apologized sincerely, and even invited her to coffee to get to know her better. My girlfriend was skeptical at first, but agreed to give her a chance. My parents took longer to come around. They were embarrassed by the whole situation and struggled to admit they'd enabled my sister's behavior. Eventually, my father called and offered a gruff apology, saying he should have backed me up instead of telling me to keep quiet. My mother followed suit a few weeks later, though her apology came with caveats about how I could have handled things differently. I accepted them both for what they were. I never reinstated the wedding. My sister and her fiancé ended up having a small ceremony at a local venue 6 months later, paid for entirely by them and his family. I attended with my girlfriend. We sat in the 3rd row, not because we were being snubbed, but because that's genuinely where we fit in the smaller setup. It was simple, intimate, and honestly more meaningful than the 300-person spectacle would have been. During the reception, my sister stood up to give a speech. She thanked everyone for coming, talked about how much the journey to this day had taught her about what really mattered, and then she looked directly at me. She said that she'd learned the hard way that the people who love you aren't the ones who throw money at you or give you everything you want. They're the ones who set boundaries and demand to be treated with respect. She said she was grateful to have a brother who loved her enough to teach her that lesson, even when it hurt. The room was quiet. A few people who knew the backstory shifted uncomfortably. But when I met her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: genuine remorse and respect. I nodded at her, a small acknowledgement that we were on the path to something better. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did. I froze the wedding because I refused to be erased and devalued by the people who were supposed to love me. It was harsh, maybe even cruel, but it was necessary. Sometimes you have to blow everything up to rebuild on solid ground. There wasn't room for me at that wedding, so I made sure there was no room for anyone. And from the ashes of that disaster, we've started building something more honest. It's not perfect, and it probably never will be. But at least now, everyone knows where they stand. And I'm no longer anyone's ATM.